Those puny little ants outnumber us 100 to 1. And if they ever figure that out, there goes our way of life. It's not about food. It's about keeping those ants in line. That's why we're going back.
Wow, this character is the best part of the movie. Who plays? Oh, fuck. Pixar movies are considered to be some of the highest quality blockbuster animated movies to ever exist. But what is the ultimate Pixar movie? Introducing the ultimate Pixar tier list. Our second film in the ultimate Pixar tier list is A Bug's Life. It follows bugs of all shapes and sizes, and of course, the scale of the story is very small. It uses the same formula that Pixar set up in Toy Story, that being, what if blank were like humans? It uses some clever settings and set pieces to show both the scale of the bugs and also how they use stuff like discarded items. However, unlike Toy Story, the writing and themes seem to hold this film down from being what could possibly be a great film. And for every bright spot this film has, it has another blemish to match, limiting the film's potential. Going into Bug's Life, I wasn't really sure what to expect. I hadn't seen this movie in so long, and my memories were just bits and pieces of this film, and I was very curious why that is. There are other Pixar films that I've only seen once or twice, but I have a pretty good memory of, but A Bug's Life seemed to escape my mind, even if my youthful self absorbed almost everything I watched. I was curious why, but upon watching this film again, I kind of understand it more than I ever could before. This film is very forgettable. Now that is not to say it is terrible, because I do not think it is terrible. Actually, I think there's a lot good about it. I like a lot of play they do with the sense of scale. Now I know this is to be expected in a Pixar film. They even did it in Toy Story, but here they do it in some really fun ways, like how they use like discard items like Chinese food takeout boxes as props, or bottle caps, or like ice cube trays as like stands. I really like that a lot. I think some of the settings are somewhat interesting, especially the city, but that's really all we see outside of the island. And the island itself is interesting, as I'll talk a little bit about later, but it does feel like this movie could have branched out a little bit more, and my memory told me that this was a grand adventure across this vast land of bug-related places, but I guess not. Something else I really like about this film is the main villain, Hopper, played by no other than Kevin Spacey. Oh man, but he does a good job. He does a good job. He's a good actor, unfortunately. But that being said, yes, I thought Hopper was easily the best part of this film. He is a really good villain. Honestly, a standout Pixar villain. His like speeches and presence is just so terrifying. Opening scene where he just breaks through like the ant colony, or the speech he gives where he's talking about how one ant is like a little piece of food, but together they could just overpower him, and now they have to stomp them in the line. And just like brutal force that he has is very chilling. He's a really good Pixar villain for sure. On top of that, this film sort of follows the same method of constant joke telling that Pixar always does. I did it in Toy Story, of having constant gags and jokes non-stop, almost never ending, going through the whole film. But unlike Toy Story, which almost all of them, pretty much all of them hit, these are very hit and miss. Some of the jokes here are very clever. There's so many gags, it's kind of hard to really think about it in my head, but there were so many funny moments where I did go, this was a really clever little bit here, and they didn't overstay its welcome. It's like this is something that happens for like 1 or 2 seconds in the film, and then they move on, and I like that a lot. But there are some other jokes that just don't hit, especially when they try to sort of make the joke like, this person has a funny voice. Like, some of the ants just have like Midwestern accents for some reason, and then it's like, here's like a Swedish accent, and here, like, that's the humor. It's like, they don't really do anything with it. It's like, I feel like they missed some potential there. Sort of brings me to the characters. Another spot I'm very sort of iffy on. I feel like Flick is a very weak protagonist. I think he isn't really that strong. I think he is actually one of the weaker Pixar protagonists I've ever seen. He is not really that dominating on screen. His presence really isn't that inviting. He doesn't really take over any scenes. He just kind of like melds into the background a lot of the time, and I just feel like he just isn't really a captivating protagonist. I never really feel like he's someone that I relate to or someone that I understand. His arc is just very simple. It's just like, oh, I'm a failure, I can't do anything right, and oh, we did something right, yay, like that's it. Like it's very simple. Side characters too are very iffy. I think a lot of the ant colonies are probably my least favorite characters. A lot of them just aren't very interesting. They don't really provide much depth. The only perhaps one that is decent is Dot. I feel like she does a good job bouncing off maybe the flick at the end there, but she doesn't really captivate me by herself. A lot of the circus characters are more interesting and more humorous. They do have their moments. I never really found the caterpillar that humorous. At the end, they had this joke like, "He grew some wings and they're small and he can't fly." And I don't know. Like he's a little too obnoxious for me. It doesn't feel. He's not funny. On the other hand, I think like characters like the stick bug and the ladybug do a pretty good job, as well as the flea do a good job of having some humor in there that I enjoy. But the other ones are all hit and miss, and some of them are even forgettable. But the characters are, some of them are funny, some of them aren't, but they definitely don't have that same charm that a movie like Toy Story did, where every side character from Mr. Potato Head to Rex to Ham, every single one of them provided a lot of humor and provided a lot of charisma. That's what I'm looking for. And that's something that I feel like was missing here. Despite having a pretty good voice cast, it felt like the characters just didn't have that charisma, besides Hopper. I do want to talk about the final shot of this film because I think it is really, really clever. I think it's actually the best part of the film. This entire film, they're on this island, and we don't really see how it's it doesn't feel like an island. It's like, what do you mean you're on an island? I don't really understand this. And it always shows from the bug's perspective, the whole film. Except for the final shot where it zooms out and shows pretty much where the entire film took place. And it is like, oh my god, like that is really, really, really clever. It's just like showing how we never really saw where most of the story takes place. The scale of the story is just so smart. It's really, really smart. And I gotta give him credit for that. I never really saw that coming, and I thought it was a really, really good wrap up to the story. But speaking of story, that's where most of my problems in this movie derive from. I think this movie has some really good ideas and concepts, but the writing is really, really lackluster. Honestly, I just feel like the writing in this film is pretty damn weak. They have a lot of moments where characters just like sort of like say what they're doing, like they just like have like a nice little soliloquy of, this is our evil plan, or this is what we do next, or this is who I am, and this is what we're doing. So many annoying plot conveniences, like Flick and the circus, like they misunderstand each other's intent, and it's funny and cute maybe when it happens once, but then it happens like twice, and like 3 times, and then it keeps happening, and it's just like, ugh. This is just not good writing. Also, like, there's the moment where, like, it just feels so annoying when all the ants are like, Flick, you're a liar, you're not a good person, you screwed up, and they just do it again and again and again and again and again. It just feels like the writing is really, really stale. It seems like they didn't really have much to do here with like the screenplay. Like it felt like really it felt sort of weird in structure, in that the movie starts off on the island and it sets up this grand adventure Flick is going to go on, but it's over in like 10 or 15 minutes. He's back with the circus bugs, and then the rest of the movie takes place on the island. And I found the city much more of an interesting landscape, but even beyond that, I just feel like as a writing technique, this movie sort of fails in a lot of ways. It doesn't really set up like an interesting arc or any interesting like courses of action, I should say. Besides for the climax of the film, the very end of the film, it does feel like a lot of this movie just sort of wanders around and doesn't really know what to do. It's very indicative of the first act, which I think is very weak. I think this movie starts off very, very, very poorly. It doesn't really get me hooked or get me interested, and it just sort of has this sort of uninteresting environment or setting or premise. I'm not sure what it is. The second act does get a lot better, especially when he gets to the city, the flick that is. They set up so many interesting stuff that the gags really start hitting, the humor starts going, and everything just starts hitting and hitting and hitting. Of course, there are a lot of misses, but when it hits, it hits. And the third act is pretty solid too. I do like the ending of this film. The final sort of like action set piece is pretty fun. And watching the scene where Hopper gets eaten by birds, I don't remember that, like by baby birds, gets fed. I actually never remember that. I thought that was a really clever scene. But yeah, after that the movie just sort of just ends too, which I mean that should be the end of the movie, but it just sort of just ends. Like it doesn't really feel like we got this grand resolution. It just sort of goes, all right, and that's it. And I don't know, I just wish the writing was more sharp, because the writing really holds this film back. One last thing I really want to focus on is the animation. I think this animation feels very outdated. I spoke about how I thought Toy Story aged very well because they decided to go with the plastic toy route, which made a lot of sense for the animation. In this sense, a lot of the bugs feel very uncanny. Well, the ants especially. The ants just feel very uncanny. Flick is pretty decent, and most of the main cast of ants are alright, but all the like extra ants and all like the ant colonies, I know it was a lot, and it was impressive to animate all those at the time, but they just don't hold up. And same with the backgrounds. I feel like a lot of the backgrounds of Toy Story, some of them held up, some of them didn't, but most of them did. And I feel like in this movie, just the environments felt very poorly textured. But I will say that is not the case with the city. I think the city was beautiful and vibrant. The scene inside the circus looked incredible. There are some really good set pieces here, no doubt about it. So the animation isn't all bad. It's just I noticed a lot more animation that stuck out like a sore thumb, way more than in Toy Story. And I sort of scratched my head a bit. I do like the character designs for most of the circus members, but I just feel like the city was the most interesting set piece and set of like animation, and it's very impressive for its time, but kind of just wish they spent more time there. It also feels like the themes of this film, just like the writing, are very poor. There's not really much to explore here. I don't know, like I just watched this film and it was fine. It was very, very fine, but I felt like they really could have done much more with this movie. There was so much potential here, and I felt like they just didn't have the ideas or the writing, or I'm not sure what it is. I think the music in this movie was really, really good. Honestly, the soundtrack was pretty damn good. But that being said, everything surrounding it, the film that is, has its moments. Do not get me wrong. There are some great moments of animation. There are some great moments of character design. There are some great moments of clever cinematography and playing with the sense of scale, stuff that Pixar's usually really good at. But with all of that comes a sea of things that are just meh or not great. Kind of surprised when I watched this movie that I wasn't remembering everything. I was like, how do I not remember this? How do I not remember this? But when the movie was all over, I kind of had a moment where like, kind of see why I don't remember this. But we gotta rank this movie somewhere on the tier list, man. So where are we gonna rank it? A Bug's Life is surely not a terrible film. It has a very, very solid villain and some clever gags here and there. The sense of scale is a fun concept, and the final shot of the film is very clever. The second and third acts are solid, but the first is dragged down a bit. The animation and textures feel rather outdated, but some scenes and shots are both beautiful and cleverly crafted, especially for its time. The writing seems to be the weakest part of this film, filled with expository writing and a subpar protagonist with hit and miss side characters. Hit and miss is almost the perfect way to describe this film. When it hits, but when it misses, it sure does miss. It's apparent that this film is forgettable in a sea of very solid early Pixar films. A Bug's Life sits right at a C rank. It is very average, with some bright spots and some ugly blemishes. It is a Pixar film that I mostly enjoyed, but one that I won't think about that much more. Well, there we go, ladies and gentlemen, another entry in the ultimate Pixar tier list, and we now move to a film that I'm very excited to revisit, that being Toy Story 2. Kind of crazy, with 3 films in, already had a sequel. Now, the next video is going to be very highly comparative to Toy Story. I'm pretty much going to compare the sequels in many different aspects, but I am going to focus mostly on Toy Story 2. If you want to see why I ranked Toy Story where I did and why I did that, I guess go check out that video and look forward to the next video, which is going to be Toy Story 2. And if you want to watch Toy Story 2 with me, I'm actually watching it with viewers on Twitch the day this video is uploaded. Pretty much these videos are going to be uploaded, at least for now, 10:30 in the morning on Saturdays, and you can see me watch Pixar film, the next Pixar film in our list that we got to get through, the same day, Saturday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time on my Twitch channel. So kind of be aware of that. That's sort of the schedule I'm going for now. It's going to be hard to say if I can stay consistent. Hopefully I can, but either way, I hope you guys stay tuned to that and keep an eye out for my next tier list. And tell me in the comments, did I rank Bugs Life too low? Did I rank it too high? Do you think it's a better film than I gave it credit for, or am I giving it even too much credit? What do you guys think about it? Let me know in the comments. Check out my Toy Story video. Keep an eye out for Toy Story 2. And remember, I am making objectively the only Pixar tier list that matters. The definitive tier list. It is top tier list. If you put it in tier list of tier lists, it's top tier. This is the S tier list and a tier list of tier lists and a tier list of Pixar tier lists.